Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in to RETCON. This is our webinar series. We're talking about industrial today. What's next in CRE technology? Contrary to the name under my video, I am James Sharon. I'm the producer here at RETCON. I'm super excited to be here with our panelists today. Folks, why don't you come on stage and we'll welcome you on. I have Don Oldham, the VP of Technology at Duke Realty, Rene Circ, Senior Managing Director and COO of GID Industrial, and Todd Lewis, Vice President at Prologis Ventures. Gentlemen, welcome today. Why don't we hear about who you are? Quick introductions.
Yeah, thanks. My name is Don Oldham, obviously, VP of IT at Duke Realty. I've been at Duke about 23 years, and we're a big box industrial REIT. 550 properties across the U.S., 150 million square feet, and glad to be here today to discuss technology.
Sounds good. I'm Rene Circ. I'm with GID Industrial. It's actually a new platform we are forming, focusing more actually on the infill side of the market. We actually have nearly 20 million square feet and 200 buildings across the country. But I'm here not as a technology expert, but more of a user that is forming a new platform, and maybe I know what I need and I don't have.
Excellent. Hello, everyone. Todd Lewis here, Vice President at Prologis Ventures. I've been with Prologis now for about 6 months. Prior to this, I was at UPS for the better part of 8 years, working with the technology and innovation sector. Most recently running their venture arm for the last 3 years, looking at technology that will shape the future of commerce. So a lot of supply chain logistics and industrial tech. So excited to be here. Awesome.
Well, a wide range of perspectives today, so we're super excited about that. For those of you tuning in, we do have question and answer. There's a little box on the bottom. You can click that in. If we can answer it during the discussion, we will. If not, we'll take some time to answer those at the end. So let's go ahead and get stuff started with a big buzzword around technology for a while now, data. Of course, super important, very, very evolutionary for sure. But how are we thinking about it? How is it impacting the decisions that you're making in industrial real estate?
Well, I think data is pretty central to everything we do from a deal perspective, whether it's a development deal, a purchasing empty land, a lease deal, acquiring properties. So it's critical. It's really a data-driven business, I think, to ensure that the data is accurate for timely decision making, for sure. Because obviously, if you do bad deals, you're not going to grow your FFO, and that's what our shareholders want. So I think that's the main role data's playing at Duke Realty. We're also doing a lot of sort of data analysis in the realm of environmental concerns to evaluate utility data, to find opportunities to reduce our environmental footprint across our portfolio.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that. I think the best way to think about it, there are sort of few distinct decisions, right? There's a decision to buy a building or not. There's a decision how to operate the building, and then there's a decision whether you want to own the building. You know, sort of a wholesale analysis. And what Don was just talking about on the acquisition side, data is extremely important. It's still very fragmented in terms of how, what's the best way to get the data. I think the brokers are still very much holding on to the data. Now, there are other third-party providers like CoStar, let's say, that you can buy subscription and you have access to a lot of information, but it's still very much closely held to the vest type of valuable commodity, if you will, especially when you're trying to get a sort of a big picture is relatively easy to get at. But if you really want to know where the lease rates are, if you really want to know where the cap rates are, it's still I would call it an inefficient process in trying to talk to as many people as you can, get as many nuggets in the market as you can, and then make the best informed decision. Now, the disposition concept, the fair decision, is sort of the same, except you're on the other side of the equation. And on the operations side, I think it's a little bit less data intensive from the perspective that you already own the building and you know how it's performing. But even there, trying to budget and trying to figure out what the optimal performance of that building would be, right? Benchmarking, knowing whether, right now the market is really strong on the industrial side. So it's very easy to do well. But are you doing as well as you could have been? Or are you just doing well because the market's doing well, right? That's a different question. And even I would say on that front, it's still quite fragmented and inefficient.
Yeah, I guess from my perspective, I mean, Rene, I'm gonna key in on something that you had mentioned earlier in your focus on infill and the role that data is playing in industrial, particularly in where our customers are starting to explore. I think if you look at how data is playing a role in where these locations are going to be prevalent for the next 5 to 10 years, it's critical. And to your point, Don, it is mission critical on the locational aspect and where kind of the future of commerce is going to sit as more infill strategies start to bubble up and these facilities become more prevalent. I think, coming from my world and my background, the demand for, kind of a more localized approach to logistics is going to change a lot of things, right? And it's going to push operations more to the edge than we've ever seen, which changes the dynamics of what a facility looks like, right? It may no longer be a rectangular, perfect kind of one shoe fits all sizes, right? So I think data in its own right is just a super broad, it's a super broad kind of swath, but it's a tool in the arsenal that if used correctly can help you kind of skate to where the puck's going to be. So the way we look at it is we're taking a look at what our customer demands are, where they're at today, right? And then what the demands of the industry are pressing them towards, and where we can start exploring real estate and kind of what's going to be key over the next 10 years. So again, super broad, and I would compliment what both of you have already said. So.
But that's actually a very interesting point, which, when you think about infill, a lot of the argument around there is that a tenant is going to look at this holistically, right? And the thesis for that investment is, well, if they're in the right location, you can charge them more rent because they are saving more on transportation. The challenge, obviously, is that every single tenant has their own supply chain, right? So when you are locating one building, you don't know where their goods are going to be coming from. Let's say they're distributing, and where they're going to be distributing to. So, a location can work for one and not the other. But what you're trying to use data for is to find sort of an intersection of as many supply chains, if you will, as you could. So then you have a much better chance of, if you don't get that tenant, you get another tenant because it's still a good location. I think what has changed in industrial over the last cycle is that it has become a little bit more like the other product types. I think the demand drivers have converged, and it's more about density and where people live and where they work and where they consume, versus just having a 1 million square foot building in the middle of the country that serves the whole country, right? Going closer to the end customer is actually way more data intensive than trying to find, if I had one building, right? That's how Indianapolis became famous in the world of industrial, right? It was always the question, if I was to have one building in the US, where would I put it? And the answer was Indianapolis. Well, not a lot of companies these days have just one building.
Definitely interesting. Diving into that a little bit more on, tenants and the decisions they're making as it pertains to leasing. What role is tech playing for you all in leasing, and how is it enabling you to retain tenants more effectively?
Yeah, so right now we're looking at adding some automation to our leasing process. We're focusing on the legal aspects of that and the collaboration to draft the lease documents more efficiently and get the turnaround time to our leasing agents more quickly. with less labor. So there's a product we're trialing in that space right now that's more template driven for the lease creation process. We're also implementing a DocuSign for the signing of the lease documents. We recently went through a 2-year implementation of Yardi's ERP platform, so we fell a little bit behind in that space. So we're doing a little bit of catch up with DocuSign. If both those projects work out as expected, we will add additional automation to reduce data entry for the lease abstraction process into the backend Yardi system, as well as starting the lease drafting process. We'll start that from our deal system instead of manual entry into Word documents. So it's potentially a big game changer for us in terms of the amount of time and labor it takes to produce a lease document, and reducing keystrokes. So that's a big focus for us right now.
Yeah, probably then another name I would throw out there. We're actually implementing a VTS, the VTS platform, where it's easier to not only operate, if you will, and get the lease tracked, but also approved, and make sure that it talks with the budget, talks with goes through the right approval process, and get it done. Where I sit, for me, a lot of times it's just so I know what's going on, right? So I mean, I think any platform that wants to be helpful, it needs to have different level of access and need. The need that I have versus the need that the property manager has versus an asset manager are very different. So anything that makes life simpler, right? I mean, if you really think about sort of technology in real estate, what doesn't exist is you can log into a brokerage account, right, and sort of see your portfolio, right? Stocks, how it's comparing relative to market, comps, whatever you want to call it, right? There really isn't a very easy way to to log into sort of one thing and know how your buildings are doing across the country, across maybe different funds, different vehicles, and all that. It's so that's one of the things that we are looking into, trying to figure out what's the best way to efficiently, and these days obviously on the go, right, iPhone or iPad or whatever, to be able to have a very good understanding of what the portfolio is doing.
Yeah, we looked at VTS, but Duke has a little bit of a unique issue because we're a GC on construction projects, and it didn't, the whole construction development deal dynamic didn't fit well into that space. So I think we will go back and look at something like a HubSpot or a Salesforce to automate the beginning of that process from a contact management, deal management perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, Don, you kind of nailed it, right? You have to automate where it's needed, and drive efficiencies both internally and then, being 6 months into Prologis, I think one of the things that's really blown me away is just how hyper focused on that customer interaction point, and technology in its own right, especially as it pertains to leasing and other aspects of these deals. It's finding new ways to streamline that process that makes it even easier for our tenants to interact with our teams. So that's both an internal and an external effort on our behalf, is to find the different streams of data that we can pull in and the different ways that we can kind of connect the dots and make those processes even more efficient. So yeah, Don, I would just, again, echo your sentiments there.
Yeah. So let's dive into, the other big behemoth that is kind of surrounding industrial real estate, which is logistics. Todd, I know that's your specialty. Are we going to see drones? I mean, is that a thing? Can you tell us?
Yeah, it's so fascinating. I spent more time than I know what to do with on drone tech and autonomous vehicles. And yes, the future is it's an interesting one when you think about how logistics is going to change the dynamics of the supply chain more holistically, and for consumer interaction and what that's going to look like, right? I think if a great example that I've often given is like the idea of having something delivered by drone is excellent. It's a very sexy topic. And then you start to think like all your neighbors that you live next to getting stuff delivered by drone. You're like, maybe it's not, maybe like flying cars and drones, like this is not so great, right? Because there's a noise pollution that comes with having drone delivery with certain hardware, right? It's kind of a foot race in the hardware component sector right now. I would think the biggest shift in technology that currently is rolling out and that I'm most excited about is really the AV sector. And so when you think about what autonomous vehicles are going to bring to bear for logistics, supply chain tech, and real estate in particular, the dynamics are huge, right? In how it can drive efficiencies from an operation. You now can run 24/7 type lanes. Again, it's probably going to trickle out over the next 3 to 4 years in the Smile States. So in that southern kind of belt, where you're going to see companies really adopt and embrace these types of operations and these new technologies. And I get excited for a lot of reasons. I've peeked under the hood of these things. I've ridden in many of them. It's extremely safe. And it's not this far-fetched kind of idea that like, oh, autonomous vehicles are going to take over. The technology is amazing and it's outstanding. I mean, they're seeing it in 1,000 feet in all directions at the same time. And that's even for me to fathom being that attentive while I'm driving is just not even in the realm of possibility. So, but what I care about on this side of the fence is as I think about my tenants and as I think about our core users and how they can leverage those technologies to drive efficiencies, 24/7 type operations don't exist for a reason. It's very challenging to manage a supply chain with a workforce that wants to be home. They want to be with their families. They should be with their families, right? And that is challenged to gain and retain employees and staff that's willing to drive across the country. And so as that technology starts to percolate, I think you're going to see a huge shift in what real estate is important, how people leverage these networks of autonomous driving to shift operations, to maybe even get a little closer to their consumers and again, start to stitch some of the inner workings of operations and efficiencies there with what's happening outside the four walls. So I get excited about what technology is coming and how it's going to change supply chains. And I'm a firm believer that we're probably 3 to 4 years out. I mean, there's already autonomous trucks on the road today, but we're probably 3 to 4 years out before you see these things roll off, OEM lines. And I think it's already here. So.
Yeah, it's interesting. It snuck up on us maybe quicker than most people sort of imagined. When I think about it from locations, I think it will be these autonomous vehicles, especially cars. I think they're going to be a huge disruptor, and it's going to be very interesting to watch because if you think about, I think the estimate is 1/3 of the land is dedicated to roads and parking and all of that. Suddenly, we don't need all of that land to be dedicated to it. If people are being driven by a car and then just get out and you don't own one, office buildings have parking lots that can become logistics distribution hubs. If we go electric, gas stations can become lockers for Amazon or whoever lockers, right? There are way better located sites today than a parking than the best located industrial building. I think of like a parking lot of every grocery store, right? If you're not parking there anymore because you just sort of get dropped off and picked up, that can be something. So I think that's going to be a huge disruptor. Now that's probably not 3 years away, right? Because by what I'm talking about is like technically nobody owns a car, and these cars are just driving by, and you sit in one because you have like a timeshare, and you get out and you're done, right? But I think at one point we are going to be there, And that will have an impact on the tenants, and it will have an impact on the owners as well.
Yeah, and my role is less about direct interaction with logistics, but I do wonder if sort of that driverless truck scenario will, sort of create this, because the trucks can run more frequently, 24/7. If you're going to have warehouses in more rural areas where you didn't have warehouses before on cheaper land, so. I don't know, that seems like a distinct possibility if things come to fruition, so.
There is a significant shortage of truck drivers in the United States. The average age is like 55, and I think life expectancy is 64. So we'll have problems in 9 years. And so I think the truck component of this is going to be very impactful. And to your point, that will have an impact where a building could be located or not. Right now you have hours what the drivers can do in a day. I assume the machine won't have those same restrictions.
Yeah, it's funny because I often say like the network of these autonomous systems that's being built today is going to shape it tomorrow. And for us, what's interesting is that the folks on this call and that are listening, like we stand at this really interesting point where we're going to become enablers for adoption. And so if real estate complements the development and the rollout of these vehicles, it will only accelerate how fast they can hit the road, pun intended. So, I get excited about the players that are in the space and how well they're doing and all their success. But I also look at this as an opportunity for, companies like ours to lean in and find out ways to embrace it and to help them connect to our existing real estate that's in our portfolios. I think it's just such a synergistic way to embrace tech and support the growth of our tenants.
Yeah, I love this idea of bringing everyone together, kind of gathering the industry. A huge part of that as well is the tenants, the folks using your space. What technologies are innovating the way that they're operating?
Well, I've seen a lot of robotics in warehouses for books, Amazon warehouses. That's our #1 tenant. So it seems like that trend will continue. I've read some things about inventory drones inside the properties to actually inventory goods and items stored on the shelving. Maybe robotics built into the forklift process as well. It seems like there's just a whole lot about robotics and potentially drones within the building that could really add efficiencies to the operations of the warehouses.
Labor became a huge topic before the pandemic. Obviously, we were running a much tighter economy then. But labor became probably the #1 discussion point when it came to we're going to open up this big building, and Amazon could have 1,500 people working in a building. Wow, that and during their sort of busy season, holiday season, it could be 2-3x that. So I think the big push is going to be by a lot of these, especially the larger ones, right? The larger logistics companies and to try to focus on making the building more efficient, so they need less space. I mean, just think about how much space Amazon's taking, right? But now they are doing 4 or 5-story buildings. Now, also stories within the building. Obviously, in Asia, they are literally different stories. But I think that's exactly what Don was talking about. It's going to be more about needing less space and being able to use the cube of the building better than just, size of a building is measured by the size of the floor, right? But so therefore, a building that's 20-foot clear and 40-foot clear, it's considered the same size building. But on a cube space, obviously, it's a 2x thing. And the industry hasn't been far along enough to really take full advantage and price that differential accordingly. But I think with technology, that's coming.
We spend a ton of time looking at this sector, and particularly myself. I coming out of UPS, we spent days reviewing different robotics companies, Don. So you touched on several of them: automated forklifts, system operations inside the four walls are going to become more intelligent. And part of our strategy on the venture arm at Prologis is to think through like what disparate workflows are huge pain points for our customers. And again, we talked about it, earlier, which was like we have so many dock doors, right? 1 billion square foot of industrial real estate space. You can just imagine how many doors need to be loaded and unloaded, right? And that's kind of the holy grail of automation. If you can have an infrastructure light type service or component to unload and load these vehicles, it's a game changer. It's a game changer for so many different reasons. But we think through these different workflows as a way to drive efficiencies, to do more with less, with the same footprint and the same headcount, right? Labor challenges is only going to continue to increase as wages increase, as it becomes more and more competitive to get the same labor and staff. And then you've got strategies involving safety and retention and growth and upskilling. I get personally very excited about the future state of the labor workforce and how it might shift. Those roles might shift into being higher paying jobs, even though there's the introduction of robotics inside the four walls, because you now have a control tower where someone's operating and orchestrating a system of robotics. In fact, one of the most exciting areas that we're probing is this idea behind robotic orchestration. And if you think about warehouse operations and how it can create a more efficient machine, the problem is these are very challenging use cases to solve, and there are brilliant people trying to tackle these individually, right? So, the differences and the nuances behind unloading a pallet versus, racking and storage, and even from a goods to person type fulfillment perspective, like it's very similar in that they're robotics and that they're moving around the warehouse. The systems that can learn and adopt those workflows are incredibly challenging. And so we're seeing a world where you're going to see different robotics companies interacting with each other inside the same facility. And for our tenants, tying it back to what they're looking at, their ability to automate without breaking their existing infrastructure, right? Without having to completely redesign from the ground up. I mean, that's a little more into your integrator. We talk about kind of innovation in robotics and automation on a structured and unstructured type paradigm. And in the unstructured world, it's highly complementary to the demands of like your 3PLs who have, 3-year contracts where they need to inject, some levels of automation to remain relevant and to remain strong and prevalent within the brands that they service. So we get super excited about chasing down what those robotics companies are doing and what they could provide from a benefit perspective to our tenants. But yeah, the robotic orchestration where you can see all of these start to get stitched together and start, automatically, managing the flow of goods inside the four walls is just so interesting, and it's great to see that emerge.
Some exciting things on the forefront for sure. I'd like to dive a little bit further into something Don mentioned at the beginning of this call, which is sustainability. Of course, extremely important to everyone in this call and the world. What is industrial, or how is technology enabling industrial buildings to be more sustainable?
Yeah, gathering the data is a bit challenging for us. Most of our leases are triple net, so we don't do a lot of work or have a lot of access inside the properties. We have outsourced our utility bill processing for bills that we pay ourselves. We don't pay all the bills ourselves for quite a number of years. We're expanding that into a newer space with a new ESG vendor. Contract's not signed yet, so I won't say their name, but to take that data match it up with or also collect data from tenants via authorization letters and building sensors on the circuit breaker box to collect energy data, at least electricity data from all three of those sources, as well as water, gas, waste for the properties. And this new ESG software and service provider we're hopefully going to contract with soon will allow us to track projects and identify efficiency opportunities in our properties and automate a lot of the regulatory reporting that we're required to do for things like RESP and Energy Star. So we're really looking forward to signing that contract and getting that initiative underway. There's an awful lot of opportunity, we think, there in that space to make a bigger impact on the environmental footprint of our properties.
Yeah, I mean, we are in a very similar position. I would say, I mean, ESG obviously is very important.
Rene, your audio seems to be tuning out a little bit when you're far away. Yeah.
Maybe I'll speak louder. So we are in a very similar position. ESG is becoming more and more important as it's becoming more to the forefront of operators, tenants, pretty much everywhere. And then depending on where you're operating, some of this data needs to be reported to local governmental agencies as well. But industrial, I still would, although it's very important, it's still relatively in its infancy where it comes to being able to collect the data. And Don hit the nail on the head. We, as the landlord, usually don't pay for the utilities, right? It's the tenant's responsibility, and therefore it is much more difficult to collect the data, and it's also much more difficult to sort of control or influence what the tenant is going to do. Obviously, industrial doesn't mean just logistics, right? There are real processes and manufacturing processes that are what they are. And so the requirements tend to be heavy power, water, what have you, for a lot of those buildings. So it's definitely something that's going to be around for forever, and that's a good thing. But right now, I would say industrial. If you look at GRESB and some of and where the data gets reported, I think industrial is a little bit further behind in terms of being able to start limiting the impact. Right, solar panels and that solar, that sort of thing's been around a while, and it's quite well sort of understood. Doesn't work equally well in every single climate, doesn't work equally in every single building. But that part is sort of pretty simple, if you will, pretty obvious. Because we've got big roofs, right? So you can put panels on them. But the next incremental things, it is definitely in its infancy, and it's something that is, I think, a lot of effort is going to be put into by owners and tenants and the local governmental agencies, for years to come.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, again, being newer to Prologis, I'm extremely proud to see how focused they are on ESG and how much we've done. We're in the top 100 from a global perspective as a corporation on our sustainability efforts. We're one of the largest providers of solar on the planet. So as I think through kind of emerging technologies that could enable even more sustainability efforts in and amongst our facilities, I think about electric vehicles and the fleets that we service in and out of our locations. We're making some serious strides in working with utility partners to enable electrification on site. It's a huge challenge, right? These fleets of the future that will be purely electric are going to have massive grid challenges as they start to percolate in some of these different markets. You can see where it's going to start, right? States that are embracing things like, some of the grants in like California, it's pretty much a no-brainer that you're going to see EV roll out at many of our locations, and many of our tenants are going to embrace that. But other states will follow suit, and hopefully where it makes sense. And we want to become an enabler of that sector. So again, holistically speaking, we look at the challenges that face EV, and we're trying to take that on behalf of our tenants and work directly with utility partners to ensure that we have access and lines directly allocated ahead of time. Because the electric fleets are probably 2 to 3 years out before they start really rolling off the line in a serious capacity. But again, as you know, working with utility partners, it takes a little bit of time to get the pull that you need. So again, that's something that we are privileged in that we work directly with those utility partners anyways. So our ability to streamline some of those headaches and make that a more efficient process for our tenants, we see that as a differentiator for us.
Oh, great. So with some budding innovations in the market, we of course have some things to choose and to integrate in our portfolios. But just making that decision and executing that is different. Don, I know you deal with a decent amount of integration with your role. How should real estate execs be thinking about that?
Well, I can't emphasize this enough. Define the problem before you select the solution. I think it's human nature to try and jump to the fancy new technology that looks cool, that might have a good benefit, but if you're not defining the problem that you're trying to solve first, you might be wasting a lot of money and a lot of time. And as far as integration is concerned, so much technology anymore is cloud-based. A lot of cloud-based technologies, multi-cloud integration is becoming more of a thing these days, because the different cloud platforms between AWS and Azure, they have strengths and weaknesses. So sort of thinking through a strategy from a multi-cloud integration perspective with what's left on your on-premise data center would be also a recommendation before jumping into big investment. So.
Yeah, I would say acceptance is probably the most important question, because even if you identify the problem, and whatever the thing is, the technology can solve it, people are not going to use it or they're going to resist it. It's going to be challenging, and it's going to be expensive, and maybe not even succeed. People are definitely creatures of habit, and when you join an organization, they are doing things a certain way. Honestly, at some point, nobody even knows why they are doing it that way. It just is. It must be true, must be good, right? And so from that perspective, I think getting a buy-in from the users is quite important, because you can spend a lot of time and money on something that actually is good, but if you're not the user and the user doesn't use it, it's not that helpful in the end.
Yeah, I like to side with you on this one, Don. Innovation for the sake of innovating is very wasteful. And the more tactful you can be in the adoption of technologies that are solving real pain points internally, I guess if we're speaking to ourselves selfishly, you're going to have, there's a change leadership aspect here. There's an adoption aspect here. Identifying innovation and integrating innovation are two very different challenges, right? But to your point, identifying the problem ahead of time so that you can be very pointed in what you want out of a solution, you get buy-in that way, right? When you're actually, listening and defining problems, it tends to have a much higher adoption rate internally when you solve real problems that people want to solve, right? And I laugh because there's so many companies in my background, you try and solve a lot, and you hear a lot of ideas thrown at the wall. That's not to say that not all technology is going to work as well, right? You can identify a problem and identify a partner, and the integration itself just falls to pieces. And that could be legacy problems. It could be a culture. Rene, to your point, I think, at Prologis, we have we have some great leadership in place that tries to enable our people to bring forth the challenges that they face so that we can identify new technologies that are needed. And there's systems in place for us to ensure that those voices are heard and that we can actually act on integrating those new solutions. So it's an interesting topic because I've seen a lot thrown at the wall in my day coming from UPS, but it's something that's extremely important. So,
Yeah,
and
that. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to finish with, technology is great if you can get past, your security and InfoSec teams. So there's a component here where you can identify the coolest tool on the planet and you could think it solves the biggest pain point. But if there's, I think the one thing that Don, you would probably echo here is the one thing that would keep our CIO up at night would be any type of data breach or any type of risk associated with embracing a new tech platform. So that's the one thing that's kind of a go, no go. And so we take that very serious here and at UPS in my previous life.
Yeah. Cyber evaluation is definitely a key part of the selection process when selecting new technology, for sure. As well as ensuring that the data is hosted within the U.S. borders. That way it's governed by U.S. law. For us anyway, because we're U.S.-based corporations. So, and one way we mitigate that sort of acceptance criteria is a lot of times we'll do what we call a crawl, walk, run. So we'll crawl first with the technology, small, low risk, because if you're going to fail, you want to fail early and often while you're crawling, and then you can walk and run, and that sort of helps with that issue. So.
I love that, Don. Now, so we all know real estate and technology haven't always gotten along as well as other industries, but it really seems like real estate and technology are finally getting together, getting along well. And you all are, of course, very integrated into technology, think about these things often, but for owners and operators who were just, kind of dipping their toes into new technology, what advice would you give them?
For dipping their toes in the new technology, I could go back to the crawl, walk, run again. Start small. Understand that failure is going to happen sometimes with new tech, and that's okay as long as you're low risk, low cost when you fail. That's not necessarily a bad thing because you're going to learn from your failures and you're going to be able to build on those failures. We have a pretty good success rate for our projects at Duke Realty, but especially in the software development space, that failure mechanism can happen from an adoption perspective on occasion. So crawl, walk, run.
Todd, Rene, any advice for the folks on camera or not on camera?
Go ahead, Todd.
Yeah, well, I would say at this point, adoption is inevitable and embrace it as much as you can. I had a great mentor once that was walking me through the lineage of artificial intelligence and machine learning and leveraging data to make more important decisions. And he was like, over the next 5 to 10 years, you're going to see this massive disparity between companies that have adopted the latest and greatest technologies and these artificial intelligence systems and smart algorithms, and those that have not. And I think the writing's on the wall that in the industrial space, you can absolutely do more with less. You can create more efficient machines. You can create more efficient operations where your people are capable of processing much larger volumes, and they're capable of providing so much benefit to the brands and their customers. So on our side, advice for those that are hesitant to adopt, I would say, buckle up because it's absolutely coming, and that you should 100% embrace it. And that I guess my own tidbit of advice or my own 2 cents would be like, do it sooner rather than later. Because it's recognize that your peers are absolutely swimming in that space, and they're looking at the latest the latest and most emerging technologies to help get there. To Don's point on the crawl, walk, run, it's a great way to think about it, right? You don't have to, break your entire system down to embrace a new tech just so that you can rebirth yourself. You can make minor changes over time and innovate and accelerate that innovation when it works. So it does not have to be a one pole on the line, so to speak. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that. I think it's coming. I personally am a big proponent of adopting things that matter, right? Because it's not free, and so it has to add value to the organization. It has to make it more efficient. And if you're just starting out, you're probably behind. And so if that's true, right, there's some level of prioritization. Can't try it all at once. And so probably starting with the big bang for the buck. Obviously, somebody like Prologis that's global and very, very large, they're probably going to be ahead of you. But in thinking about it, it's industrial is sort of interesting because we all compete and we are all friends all at the same time. It's actually it's a very nice industry to be in. But at the end, even though you're all friends, at the end you do compete. And so I think that's probably the best way to think about it. You definitely want to stay. If you can't be ahead, at least not fall too far behind.
Yeah.
Well, love that, folks. You heard it here first. Crawl, walk, run, buckle up, and we're in this together. I think that is a great adage to end this today. Don, Todd, Rene, thank you so much for joining us. For all of your tech journeys, RETCON is here to walk you through all these innovations and have some great advice from some great folks like these gentlemen today. We have a couple different webinars going on the rest of the month. Next week, we'll be talking about hospitality, and the week following that, multifamily. So we look forward to seeing you all there. Thank you all again, and we will see you soon.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.